Hey guys, it's Lewis here with pokestop519. I've decided to start making some videos on how to become a vendor, what to expect as a vendor, things to buy as vendors, how to get started as a vendor, where you should look for your products. So I'm just going to do, maybe 10 or 11 parts. I'm sure I'm going to miss some stuff, but hit me in the comments and let me know what I'm missing. But we're going to start off with becoming a good vendor. So I think, the key thing to becoming a good vendor is like basic understanding of Pokemon. So, for example, like if you're brand new to the hobby and you want to become a vendor, and maybe you watched a show, maybe you just grew up with the product, we want to start with like some basic research. So, for example, anybody out there can use Google, ChatGPT, YouTube. You can kind of learn the basics behind Pokemon. So, you can learn like your original series, your modern, your retro. You can learn things like behind the scenes, like the TV show, where it was shot, when it was shot, characters from it. You can learn that it's like one of the top licensed product in the world. And then once you get a little bit of knowledge with Pokemon in general, I think one of the next most important things is some research beyond sets. So for example, like you might want to start with certain different apps like Collector, Pokelector. You want to look at things like the history behind Pokemon. So for example, start with your original base set from 1999, work your way all the way up to 2020. Just get like a basic understanding of cards, and you don't have to dig too deep into it, but you know it's kind of important to have that like base understanding of what you're going to do, and what being a vendor is all about. So sometimes, like what I tell people that kind of mentor with me or buy product from me and they vend themselves, is that go back and look at the sets from the 90s and compare them to new sets. So like 151 brought a lot of hype back into the market, so we can compare that and correlate it directly with like base sets and jungles and fossils. So knowledge behind becoming a vendor is pretty important, and research is important, and just as important it is to know your numbers with sales, it's also important to have a background. uh, Now that you have like a pretty basic understanding of Pokemon and the cards and the market, it's going to lead you to your first step. And I would consider your first step is kind of choosing where you want to be in the market and what you want to sell. So, for example, I would say the card market consists of three different types of cards that you're going to sell. So, myself, I like to be involved in all three eras of cards. But as a new vendor, you might want to select one. So, for example, the first era we would call the retro era, which is kind of like 1999 to 2003, and that would be like our WOTC or WotC cards and early Nintendo. It would have sets that go all the way up to our E series and Expedition. So that those like 4 years are going to be considered our retro. Now from 2013 to 19, so from our early EX cards to like all the way to Sun and Moon, we would call that like more of the mid era. So for example, some people would like refer to that as like classic or traditional, but I would say mid eras from '03 to 19. Now that's all up for discussion. Someone can disagree with it. That's how I classify them. And I think anything made from like 2020 Sword and Shield to current, which is this last 5 years, I would consider modern. It's a lot less complicated with modern. Uh, but those are the three different types of cards in the market. So you have your retro, your mid era, and your modern. So now that you have like a basic understanding of like what's old, what's modern, what's mid, you can start to research your cards yourself now. So for an example, if you're going to be researching, like say you want to jump into the retro era, which is generally something I don't suggest to do if you're novice, because there's so many different things that can be affected, like condition on the cards, what cards are sellable, what cards are kind of like a little bit more floating around. uh, I generally give the advice of when you start to research cards, modern cards are probably, if you're a brand new vendor, what you would be best off starting with. When we do shows, and if I was say there was 100 vendors at a show, probably 70% of them are going to be selling modern cards, which is the last 5 years. And then another 20% are probably going to be in that mid era, which is generally XY to Sun. Now, even a little older in the mid era, we still don't have a lot of people selling it. And then we have generally about 10% of the show selling early WotC, early EX series, anything from 1999 retro, even into the mid era up to like 2011. They're not as popular in the market for selling. Now, there is a huge market for collecting them. There's a huge market for buying them. There's some of my favorite cards to sell personally. It's what I collect personally. So like my suggestion is, when you've got in the vending, you have a little bit of knowledge, you kind of understand the background of Pokemon, you want to stick to maybe in the beginning one of these eras. So you either jump in as someone that does just retro, you jump in as someone that does mid-era, or you jump in as someone that does modern. Now, when I would say, you know, if you're going to jump into the market, like, I think modern is probably going to be the easiest thing for you to jump into. And I think the reason why modern is so easy to understand is that, like, the market for cards is always going to be mint. Like, majority of the time, all modern cards are packed fresh. Modern cards sell so frequently on eBay, so frequently on TCG, that at the end of the day, if they're selling that often, comps and prices are always going to be the same. As opposed to if you jump to like a mid-era retro card, you know, not everybody's searching every night certain cards from 2007, 2006. So you might find some cards that, you know, they might be a 30% or 50% difference between prices. So it makes things a little bit more complicated. And condition, I usually find that even with vendors that have been doing it for a long time and customers, is that we always can't agree on what, you know, lightly played is and heavily played. So I would say, if you're a new vendor, I think one of the most important things to do is probably just pick one market. And once you have your one market picked, you know, stick to that, stay in your comfort zone. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do all markets. Like, I do all markets myself. I enjoy myself personally doing, you know, the retro to like early mid-era. But I do realize also that when I go to a show, that sometimes less than 10% of my revenue I take in is to that. So I do cater to more modern and then kind of end of mid-era cards myself. So let's say that you pick modern and you want to start with, like, you know, basic knowledge of modern cards. So it's pretty simple. So if we pull up 2020 and we look at all the sets that have, you know, popped off since 2020, it could probably be researched within like a couple hours of, and I'm not talking about all cards, I'm just talking about top hit cards from all those sets. So for example, if you picked modern as your market, you could start off very simply, very easily with downloading an app called Collector. And there's a million apps for cards. There's no right app. There's no wrong app. There's, you know, from price charting to alt to card ladder to collector, like, there's anything you want to use. The reason why I use Collector is I find it's just easier. So you can have up to 3 years of data on your card. You can look at sales. You can look at graded sales. You can look at, you know, pretty much everything, and it has a direct link to TCG. So the market trends, the ups and downs, and the charts are all pretty static in front of you. So I prefer using that app. Once you download the app Collector, it's super simple. I'll do like a little tutorial. I'll do a secondary video and I'll tag it. And it's super easy. So you basically jump into your app, you click on Pokemon, you click on your last set, and then you can choose every single card. You can see graphs of if they're down, if they're up. You know, it's pretty simplistic, but I'll do a whole little tutorial on how to use it and how to find cards that are kind of at the bottom of the market and a good time to buy, and then cards that are a little bit too heavy. So for example, Pokemon can be very similar to stocks. So like right now, 151, you know, it's crashed quite a bit. The market's down quite a bit. So now's a good time to start getting back into 151, as opposed to there's certain sets that are up drastically, like, you know, anything that's been released in the last 30 days that's like super, super high that you probably want to stay away from buying. Like myself, I don't even take in Journey Together just because the market isn't stable and it's a little too volatile. So now we have, like, you know, basic understanding of Pokemon, basic understanding of cards. We have a couple apps that we can use to check prices. So now it's basically, it's time to build your collection or build your empire, however you want to say. And I think the most important thing with, starting off, is that you have to understand that, you know, you can't build a collection overnight. So like some people will dive in and invest a substantial amount of money. It's not exactly generally what I suggest to do. Patience is super important in Pokemon. Uh, with previous knowledge of like what cards to hunt down and what cards to grab, and that stuff takes time, right? So like you will understand how to use apps, but then once you know what cards to buy, then that's the difference of where can you buy it, when can you pick it up, and how can you get it. So like what I tell everybody is, if you're thinking about, hey, let me quit my job because I've watched a whole bunch of vendor POVs and I'm going to make a ton of money, it's probably not the best idea in the beginning. So like what I tell everybody is that patience is super important. And when you're looking at all these guys that have huge setups and they're doing great online, some of these guys have been grinding for 6 or 7 years. So when I say, if you want to start as a vendor and you want to start out slowly, building a collection, to me, I think the most important thing is picking up cards in your price range and your budgets. So for example, if you want to start to be a vendor and you want to start to pick up cards, try to pick up cards that are between $20 to $100. And the reason why I say this is because you don't want to be driving around picking up cards from $1 to $15, because it's just not worth your time. And then you don't really want to be getting cards over that 1 to 150 range, because capital's super important, and you've got to treat it like any other business, that you don't want to invest $1,000 in one card. You'd rather have 20 cards at $50, just because the market can be volatile, and a 10% change in a $50 card at $5 is a lot better than losing $50 or $100 on a $1,000 card. So my suggestion is, when you're hunting out your collections, look at cards in that $20 to $50 range, $50 to $100 range. And I think the most important thing is, when you are hunting down, we'll do a separate tutorial on how to like search out what cards are great, what cards are good to look at. But when you do hunt these cards down, I generally give everyone the same advice. If a set like Journey Togethers just came out, or the last 2 sets, I generally don't recommend you jumping into them. Volatility is really rough in the Pokemon market, and I've personally been stuck with cards before, and it'll happen to you. It's impossible not to. But I would suggest to maybe go 3 sets back, and then you probably want to look at like the top 15 cards in each set. So you don't necessarily want to grab, the cheapest cards or the most expensive, but as long as you're looking at the top 15 cards, which are generally the ones that are going to persistently go up in price after they've been released, that's probably what I would start with. And like the $1 million question that I have from everybody, and I've been doing this for a long, long time, is, where do I find deals and how do I grab cards? And it's a question that, as a vendor of years and years, I find myself asking it every day. Where do I get stuff? Where can I buy things? And the important part is, we'll do the exact same thing. What you're going to do is what I'm going to do, is what all my other vendor friends do, is just hustling online. So for example, like when you're building a collection, where do you find deals? You want to start with places like the marketplace. So once you have a knowledge of what a few cards are worth, and we jump over to the marketplace, maybe we jump over to somewhere like eBay, maybe we jump into like a card ladder app, or maybe we jump into like a Carrot app. And what you want to do is, you just want to, with your knowledge, and you've stuck into Modern, say for example, you want to now look at what cards are available, and you want to check out the prices. You want to find the cards that are down a little bit, or you think that they're going to trend up by watching the charts. And then you just make some offers. And I will be honest with you, going through the marketplace or even going to card shows, reasonable offers generally aren't turned down. So when we talk about margins, that the margins between Pokemon vendors, can be anywhere from 5% to 20%. It all depends on, how hot and how liquid the card is. And liquid's a word that you're going to hear a lot in the Pokemon industry, because it's super important, liquidity of cards. So for example, if you go on the marketplace and you find a great lot, and you add it up on your price charting tool or your vault tool or whatever tool you want to use, and your amount comes up to like $100, and you make an offer of $80, that's your first start to buying and selling and flipping. So with time comes knowledge. There's no way to just understand everything right out the gate. So start with something simple, buy your first $100 lot, and then, you know, put it back online. And now you might have to ask 50 people, 60 people, like, hey, I'm interested, can I grab this, can we do this? And it might not work most times, but at the end of the day, you're going to find something that does work. You can also, you know, find deals through vendors. You can go to shows. Maybe you have $1,500 saved up and you go to a vendor at a show and you say, hey, listen, I want to do a bulk purchase. Can we get somewhere in between, you know, 10% off to 20% off, or work out whatever deal you can? That's another avenue. Online is a good avenue. You just have to be very, very careful online. eBay and certain websites have taxes, so you just want to make sure you're not paying taxes on orders, because that can really cut into your profits. Another thing that I've been doing for years and years here is we do like a full mentor program. So we pull vendors under our wings, and we give deals to vendors. We sell to many, many vendors in Ontario. And not only do we sell to vendors at a discounted rate, we teach the vendors on, you know, how to get into the game, what to buy, what to look for, what to touch on, what to talk about. And then once we have the vendors, you know, everything they need, and first-time vendors, then we bring people to shows. So we have shows from as far as London to Ottawa to Toronto to Niagara Falls. We do shows 2 times a week plus, so you can always find someone like myself. We can bring you in, we can get you set up with some product, we can get you set up at tables, at shows. And like I said, like, it's, for me, I enjoy it. I have a good time. I think I'm gonna wrap this one up here. This is just the basics. So today there's probably a ton of stuff that I missed, but just becoming a vendor, you know, understanding Pokemon, basic research, apps. The apps is kind of like the more important thing to understand. So I'll do a full video on a couple different apps. First steps, understanding where you want to start. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, you know, you talked about, you know, different types of cards and eras, but you didn't talk about grading, and you didn't talk about collections, you didn't talk about sealed. And, you know, I'm going to try to post a video every week and talk about different things with vending. We're also going to throw some vending videos up there. So I think right now the basic gist of this is, like, I'm talking about raw cards, because raw cards do move the best out of anything you can sell. And I'm going to link all this stuff directly to my Instagram. So if anybody has questions, you can send me a message through Instagram, Facebook, my phone number. It's all on Instagram. So then we talked about, like, researching your cards. You know, we talked about what sells the most at shows. We talked about what I would recommend to get into there. We talked about, you know, modern being what most people are looking for. Then we went back to the apps. Then we talked about where to find deals. You know, the next video after we talk about the app, we'll probably talk about where to sell, how to sell. We talked about margins, a very, very small amount, but on another video, we'll talk about the nitty and gritty of, like, exactly, you know, how much money you can make, and, you know, what can be done. And I'll be honest, like, in the last 6 or 7 years, we've had multiple people that have full-time jobs that have quit to vend full-time, because it is a lucrative business. But like any other business, like is real estate or car sales, like, it does take effort and time. Then we talked about, what else did we talked about? Building your empire, buying your cards, patience. And if I could take away anything from, like, you know, this whole little video here, is that I learn every single day from new vendors, old vendors, and patience is probably the most key thing. Making money is just patience, and building your empire, networking. And we'll do an entire video also on, you know, networking and getting to know people, and the key to it, how important it is to have friends, like, in the business. And, like, it sounds silly, but it makes a substantial difference. And then we talked about building up a collection, starting with, you know, price points in the $20 to $100 range. We talked about briefly on focusing on popular sets. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll try to post a video. I'm going to put this first one on a YouTube channel. So